You've seen the shows, you've played the games. You're pretty sure you have what it takes to be a Viking. You can picture it now, standing shoulder to shoulder with legends, axe in hand, sailing for glory. Well, I'm here to tell you that almost everything you think you know is wrong. Those horned helmets, a Victorian invention, the glorious, honorable deaths in battle, a tragic rarity. The reality of the Viking Age was far more brutal, far more disgusting, and far less glorious than any saga would have you believe. For the average person, life wasn't about epic raids. It was about grim, desperate survival. Today, we're breaking down why your modern skills would be useless, and why you almost certainly wouldn't survive a single season in the Viking Age. So, if you're ready to have your heroic fantasies shattered, let's get into it. First up, let's talk about the single thing that would dominate your new life: constant, agonizing hunger. You probably picture Vikings feasting in giant halls, but for most, daily life was a desperate scramble for calories. See, most Vikings were farmers, not raiders, and farming in Scandinavia was a brutal, thankless job. The northern climate meant short growing seasons, and the rocky landscape was not exactly prime real estate for agriculture. Their lives were ruled by the success or failure of their meager crops, mostly hardy grains like barley, rye, and oats. These were ground down into bland, dense breads and thrown into a perpetual, simmering stew pot. This cauldron was the centerpiece of the Viking diet. New ingredients, a few root vegetables, maybe some scraps of meat if you were really lucky, were just added on top as old ones were eaten, meaning that stew could have been cooking for days or even weeks. Fresh meat was a massive luxury. While they raised pigs, goats, and cattle, these animals were far more valuable alive for their milk, wool, or labor. Most animals were slaughtered in the fall to avoid feeding them through the harsh winter, and the meat was then preserved by drying, salting, or smoking. So forget about fresh steaks. Think tough, leathery, and intensely salty meat that had been hanging for months. And when the harvest failed, which it often did, famine was right around the corner. During a bad winter, you weren't just hungry, you were facing slow, agonizing starvation. Your modern knowledge of macronutrients is useless when the only way to make the bread last longer is to grind up tree bark and add it to the flour. Okay, let's say you survived the hunger. Congratulations. Your reward is dealing with rampant disease and healthcare that was more likely to kill you than cure you. Life in a Viking longhouse was crowded, dark, and unbelievably filthy. You'd be sharing a single smoky room with your entire extended family, and during the winter, your animals. The concept of sanitation didn't exist. All waste was just thrown outside the door, creating a paradise for pests and bacteria. This was a perfect breeding ground for diseases like dysentery and smallpox, which could rip through a community with terrifying speed. But it wasn't just the major plagues. Everyday injuries were a potential death sentence. A simple cut from a farming tool could lead to a raging infection, and without antibiotics, that meant a slow, painful end. Skeletal remains from the era tell a grim story. Arthritis was incredibly common, even in young adults, thanks to a lifetime of hard labor. Dental health was atrocious. Skulls show widespread cavities and abscesses that would have caused debilitating pain, and it wasn't uncommon for a Viking to have lost most of their teeth by middle age. As for medicine, it was a terrifying mix of herbal remedies and outright superstition. A healer might diagnose a stomach wound by feeding the patient a strong broth of onions and herbs. If they could smell the onions coming from the wound, it meant the intestines were pierced and the injury was declared fatal. Infant mortality was tragically high, with perhaps a third of all children dying before their 5th birthday. If you survived childhood, your life expectancy hovered around 35 or 40, though a lucky few might have seen 50. Your first aid kit and hand sanitizer wouldn't stand a chance. So you've managed not to starve or die of an infection. What's next? A life of servitude, because unless you somehow arrived with a warband and a pile of silver, you'd land at the absolute bottom of the Viking social ladder. Norse society was rigidly divided. At the top were the jarls, the wealthy elite. In the middle were the carls, the free farmers and craftsmen. And at the bottom were the thralls, slaves. As a stranger with no family, no land, and no skills they'd recognize, that's almost certainly where you'd end up. Thralls weren't considered people. They were property, with absolutely no legal rights. They could be bought, sold, beaten, or killed at their master's whim. If someone killed their master's thrall, they just had to pay for the damaged property, as if they'd killed a cow. Your life as a thrall would be endless, back-breaking labor. Men tended the fields and built walls. Women performed the most grueling domestic chores, like grinding grain for hours a day with a hand mill, and were often subjected to sexual violence by their masters. The entire Viking economy was built on the backs of this slave labor, and your service might not even end at death. High-status Vikings were often buried with their most valuable possessions, and that included their slaves. Archaeologists have found burial mounds where thralls were sacrificed to accompany their master into the afterlife, doomed to serve them for eternity. Your modern sense of freedom and individuality wouldn't just be useless, it would be dangerous. But what if you got lucky and remained a free person, a carl? Don't get comfortable. Viking society wasn't lawless, but its justice system would be terrifying to us. Order was maintained through local assemblies called things, where free men could vote on laws and settle disputes. But the core of their justice system was built on two things: personal honor and blood feuds. Your reputation was everything. A public insult wasn't just embarrassing, it was a deep wound to your honor and could be answered with violence. Serious disputes were often settled not in a courtroom, but with a duel to the death, known as a holmgang. If someone wronged you or your family, the responsibility to get even fell squarely on your shoulders. This created multi-generational blood feuds, where a single killing could spark a cycle of revenge that consumed families for decades. If you killed someone, their family had the social obligation to kill you or one of your relatives. The only way out was to pay wergild, or man price, a huge sum of silver paid to the victim's family. If you couldn't pay, the feud went on. And if you committed a truly terrible crime, you could be declared an outlaw. This was more than just being a wanted man. It meant you were legally no longer a person. You were banished, your property was taken, and anyone, anywhere, could kill you without any consequence. Your only option was to flee into the wilderness, which was almost always a death sentence. The romantic image of the Viking warrior is a powerful one, but it's a fantasy. It conveniently ignores the hunger, the filth, the disease, and the brutal social code that defined life for almost everyone back then. It was a world where simply surviving the day was a victory, and where your modern knowledge would be about as useful as a smartphone in a blizzard. You wouldn't be a shield maiden or a legendary raider. You'd be a casualty. So, after all that, what part of Viking life do you think would be the absolute worst? The constant physical hardship, or the brutal, unforgiving society? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this trip into the harsh realities of the past, be sure to like this video and subscribe for more history that they don't put in the movies. Thanks for watching.